Well, it finally happened. After years of open carrying, I finally got swatted by a concerned citizen. Or at least I think I did. Hey everybody, Yankee here. As I just said in the opening, it appears that after years of open carrying, I finally got swatted. You know, something that a lot of people are fearful of. They're always afraid that if they open carry, they're going to get swatted. You know, they're going to get gunned down in the street by police. And it appears that that has happened to me. Not the getting gunned down in the street by police, but someone called the police on me open carrying a firearm. Or at least it seems like that. And you might be saying now, well, how does it seem like that? It seems you would know if it happened. Well, that's kind of a long story, and I'm going to get into it here. I'll explain to you how it seems to have happened, but I can't be 100% certain. And then I'm going to go over the moral of the story at the end, you know, how things actually played out and what we can learn from that. I'm kind of a test case a lot of the times. I do things a lot of people think are unsafe or dangerous, you know, like showing stuff on the internet and letting people know what I got, open carrying, etc. I take the risk so you don't have to. Like I said, I'm kind of a test case. So this appears to have happened this past week. And because of what was going on this past week, I've been going to a lot more places than I usually go. And I don't think anything about it that I'm open carrying because, you know, I just do it all the time. So I don't even really consider, you know, maybe I should cover up to go in this place or that place. Now, there's certain places I know I can't go when I'm carrying, but when I'm going to new places, I don't really think about that. Now, normally I pretty much only go to 5 places, period, ever. So open carrying is not a problem for me because I pretty much only go to Sporting Systems, my gun shop. I go to my local Napa auto parts store. I go to my local feed store. I go to my local grocery store, and I go to my local hardware store. And those are the only places I go. And they pretty much all know me, so I don't have a problem. Plus, I'm a non-scary, older white guy. I don't really cause a lot of alarms in people. So they don't really pay much attention to me. So I never have a problem. But over this last week, and bear with me through this long rambly story, we've been doing a lot of car repairs. My son decided he wanted to buy a Mustang. And to do that, we had to get his Camaro ready for sale. And of course, right after he buys the new Mustang, or it's not new, but new to him, we start getting a gas smell from his Camaro. So we had to fix that. We thought it was the evap system. Turned out it was a leaking fuel injector. So we had to replace that. And by the way, whoever designed the 6-cylinder engine for the Camaro, the 2012 Camaro, should be kicked in the taint. Those fuel rails are the hardest things I've ever had to try to put back in my life. So that person needs to suffer if they're still alive. And if they're not alive, well, I hope there's a hell and I hope they're in it. But like I was saying, we had to get that car ready to sell. And then there were some things we needed to do to the Mustang. It was having a vacuum leak and we had to try to fix that. We needed to put new seals on the intake manifold, etc. So we were working on that. And while we were putting the intake manifold on, I broke one of the bolts because I over-torqued it. Because I didn't pay attention to what the wrench is set to because I can't see what the wrench is set to. And my son should know that. But I asked him, is it set to the right one? He said, yeah. And then he said, oh, wait, right for what? As I snapped the bolt. But had to go try to find new intake manifold bolts for this car and had to find some other things. We were replacing a thermostat on my sister's car. I mean, my front driveway looked like a salvage yard for a while. So doing all this stuff, and while we were going looking for the bolt, we had to go to several different places, different hardware stores, auto parts stores, all kinds of places. We even went to the dealerships. We went everywhere we thought we could possibly get this bolt. We even went to some places in a downtown little posh area buying stuff for the car repairs. That's one of those little areas, you know, it's a little river town that's, you know, really nice. It's got the little twinkle lights everywhere and all this stuff when you go at night and everybody hangs out there. Kind of an upscale neighborhood. I didn't think anything of it, but I went down there and looked at one of their shops while we were out. And that appears to be when it happened. Now, we never did get the bolt because it turned out the bolt was discontinued and we had to find a bolt that was similar and rethread it to where we could use it, which is working out fine, but that's beside the point. But like I said, we went to a store I don't usually go to and we bought some stuff. And one of the things turned out to be the wrong thing. So I needed to return it. So I took it back down to return it the other day. And when I went in to say, hey, I need to return this or exchange it for the right one, they said, well, you'll have to go to over here and he'll help us. The manager will help you over there. He'll get your return done for you. Well, I go over and we're doing it, and I see he sees my gun on my hip. I'm carrying my Colt Python as always. And he's like, were you in here the day before yesterday? And I said, yeah, I was in here the day before yesterday. That's when I bought this. And he said, I thought so. He's like, because I got a phone call the day before yesterday from the local police asking if we had an armed person in the store and if there was any problem. And he's like, I told him there was no problem. So never thought anything of it again. He said, and I remember seeing you 2 days ago about that time. It was probably you. He said, I told them we get armed people in here every now and then. We live in an open carry state. Doesn't appear to be anybody doing anything, so no problem came of it. But what appears to have happened is someone obviously called the police and said there's an armed person going into this establishment. And we think there might be problems. And that's, what a lot of people like to think of as swatting, because I wasn't doing anything wrong, but someone's calling the cops on me. And they're like, oh, when that happens, you're going to get gunned down in the street. And I just want to say, no, that is not normally going to happen because most people are fairly reasonable. And apparently the person who called the police must have just said, hey, I see someone going in armed. They didn't say, oh, there's a guy with an AK shooting up the place or anything, or the police would have showed up. So the police apparently took their report, and the police probably did their due diligence like they should. Even a basic police officer should be able to say, okay, well, what kind of weapon was it? Was it a rifle? Was it a handgun? Was it in their hands? Or was it slung over their shoulder? Or was it in a holster on their hip? All kinds of things to try to gauge the threat there. And then they decided, I guess, based on this report and what they asked them, that it wasn't a big enough concern to actually roll the vehicle. They just phoned the business. And the business said, no problem. And I didn't even know about it till 2 days after it happened, when the guy's like, oh, I think it was probably you, because I remember seeing you here about that time. So apparently someone called the police on me. The police responded to it, and the store owner said, no big deal. It happens every now and then. Probably doesn't happen as much there because it's more of a ritzy part of town as it does over where I live in Washougal. Because in Washougal, it happens a lot. When I go to the hardware store in Washougal, I'm usually one of 2 or 3 people in there open carrying. So really not a big deal over here. Probably more of a big deal over there, but at least the manager had the sense to know it's not that uncommon. So nothing actually came of it because everybody along the way seems to have been a reasonable person who did things the reasonable way. And that's usually what's going to happen in most scenarios. Now, there have been some groups. There was one anti-gun group at one point. Remember, they were telling people, if you see someone with a gun, call the police. Whether you think they're breaking the law or not. And if you have to embellish, embellish. We want these people carrying guns to be harassed by police. But they quit doing that pretty quickly because they were informed by their lawyers and social media and everybody else that you're basically trying to commit murder by cop. That whole organization, I think, disappeared shortly after that, or actually probably just changed their name. But things like that, like you being shot down because of someone calls in a complaint, it's not very likely to happen. A lot of people use that as an excuse, well, I'm not going to take any risks, I'm not going to open carry, whatever. And if you don't want to open carry, that's fine. I understand why most people don't. They get very self-conscious when they open carry. I think most of that's for naught because most people aren't even going to notice you. And if they do, they're not going to think anything. And if 1 or 2 rare people notice you and say something, well, hopefully the people in that line of communication there can do reasonable thought processes, and say, well, is this really something dangerous or is this just normal activity? Like what apparently happened there. So don't be afraid. I know everyone is conditioned these days to be terrified all the time because my side is all good and light and the other side is all darkness and evil and their main goal is to get me killed. That's just not the case. There's a small number of people on each side of the spectrum that are crazy nut jobs, and your chances of running into one of them is pretty slim, especially if you don't hang out where they hang out. Everybody else in the middle, they have more in common with each other than they do with either of the extremes. Everyone who's to the right of center has more in common with people to the left of center than they do with the extreme right. Everyone who's left of center has more in common with people to the right of center than they do with people on the extreme left. Those are a tiny minority of people, and most of them ain't got their shit together enough to be a threat to anyone. So this whole culture of fear we live in is unreasonable. And that right there, that's a perfect example of that. People always tell me, you're going to get swatted, you're going to get shot. And I got swatted and didn't even know it, or at least it appears I did. Maybe there was another person there with a gun that day. I don't know. It could be. Like I said, I'm hearing this secondhand, wasn't even aware it happened. But after hearing it, I was like, well, that's just a perfect example of how people shouldn't be as afraid as they are of things like that happening, because it's very rare. I think you're far more likely to be murdered by someone who's trying to commit a crime than you are to be swatted. And here's another statistic. You're far more likely to be murdered by your own spouse or a family member than you are for being swatted. So maybe instead of worrying so much about being swatted, worry about being nicer to people in your family, because that's your biggest risk, really. It's one of the things people don't seem to understand in this country. We live in a country that's so politically divided. We are very politically divided. You know, those loud people on both ends of the spectrum, you know, manage to scare most people. But there's very little political violence. I mean, the fact that you can name them means that there's very few. It just doesn't happen very often. Like I said, you're far more likely to be killed by your own spouse than you are to be a victim of, than a politician is to be a victim of political violence. So like I said, the culture of fear is unwarranted in most cases. Now, you should always be cautious and don't take any chances you're not comfortable with. But also, don't let fear stop you from being a good example for the gun community. If you're someone who is a good, upstanding citizen, you carry every day, consider open carrying sometimes. Because like I say, it's not just more comfortable, it actually desensitizes people to the presence of a firearm. If every day when they go to the grocery store or the hardware store, they see a person or two carrying, well, they'll get used to it. And eventually, I think most reasonable people will be like, you know what, I feel safer today because I'm standing here at the Piggly Wiggly and there's two people carrying sidearms. So if someone broke in here, I feel like I've got someone to protect me. Better yet, they should be protecting themselves. But if not, if they're one of the people that doesn't carry, they should feel comforted. I actually had one of the employees at a local hardware store tell me that the other day, that they feel more comfortable when we're in there. They don't mind us open carrying in there. They're like, we're not going to get robbed. So I think a lot of people get it. Most people get it. And most people aren't evil. Most people aren't monsters. So this culture of fear is unfounded. And like I said, that's just one more example, I think, that kind of proves it. The very fact that someone actually did call the police, either on me or someone else, and nothing came of it, other than a little anecdote told to me later, that right there shows that people spend a lot of their time being afraid of stuff that's never going to happen.